Are Kubernetes and Docker the same? Is the conductor of an orchestra and the musicians who play the music the same?
Hello everyone, this is Satyajit. Today I'm going to try to answer some common questions about Kubernetes very briefly. So let's start. Okay, so I'm in this website called answerthepublic.com, which is a wonderful tool to explore what all questions that are asked on a particular topic on the internet. So in my case, I have searched for Kubernetes keyword, and this shows me all the common questions that are asked related to Kubernetes on the internet. So I'm going to go through these questions and try to answer as many as I can briefly. So let's start. Okay, are Kubernetes secrets secure? Not by default, you have to enable some encryptions to make it more secure. Are Kubernetes and Docker the same? Well, is the conductor of an orchestra and the musicians who play the music the same?
Now the orchestra.
It's kind of the similar logic here. So Kubernetes, it orchestrates the containers, and Docker we usually use to create containers. Are Kubernetes secrets encrypted at rest? Yes. What are Kubernetes pods? So pods are some of the most basic objects in Kubernetes. Inside a pod, we can have multiple containers running, and a pod usually runs inside a node in a Kubernetes. What are Kubernetes containers? So basically any container that runs in a Kubernetes cluster. And if you want to know what is container, it's basically a package form of your application. What are Kubernetes operators?
Operator. Link.
Operators are kind of related to custom resources in Kubernetes. So Kubernetes offers many objects like deployments or replica sets or pods. You can create your own custom resource, and operators are kind of the managers or controllers of a custom resource. So one example can be Jaeger operator. So Jaeger is used for open tracing, and if you install Jaeger in your Kubernetes cluster and if you run the operator as well, then it ends up running a Jaeger instance, which basically ensures that Jaeger runs fine in your cluster. What are Kubernetes clusters? A Kubernetes cluster usually consists of a master node and worker nodes. And inside the worker nodes, your actual application runs in the form of a pod. A worker node usually has two things, kubeproxy and kubelet. So kubelet ensures the things are running fine in a node, and kubeproxy is kind of like a service of the node. And the master node consists of API server, the scheduler, which ensures the pods are scheduled properly, etcd database, which is used to store all the data, and a controller manager, which ensures things are running smoothly and as expected in the cluster. Okay, next, what are Kubernetes services? So services are basically networking endpoints for pods. So if you want to expose your pod inside your Kubernetes cluster or outside of the Kubernetes cluster, that's when you have to write a service. Where are Kubernetes secrets stored? In the etcd database. What are Kubernetes and Docker? I already explained. What are Kubernetes namespaces? So when you have multiple applications running which are very different from each other inside your Kubernetes cluster, then you need a way to be able to separate them in a nice way so that it's easier for you to manage them. So you group them together using namespaces. So it's kind of like a virtual clustering inside your actual physical machine. So there are many advantages of using namespaces. So one example can be if I want to mesh all of my containers running in one namespace, I can easily do that in just one simple command without having to do it in the containers running in another namespace. Where are Kubernetes logs? I have experience in Google's GKE, and it uses Stackdriver for storing logs, but it depends on what tools you are using. What are Kubernetes objects? Pods, replica sets, deployments, services are usually termed as Kubernetes objects. A pod, as I explained, is the simplest unit in a Kubernetes cluster which runs the containers. Replica set is a layer on top of it which manages the pods, so it ensures a certain number of pods are always running. So in case one of them goes down, it brings another pod back up. Deployment is another layer on top of replica set. So it is useful for things like zero downtime rollouts or rollbacks if you want. And services, as I said, is a networking endpoint for any application you are running. What are Kubernetes secrets? I'm not going to reveal the secrets of Kubernetes. But yeah, it's the secrets you store in Kubernetes. What are Kubernetes resources? So usually there are two resource limits, like CPU limit or memory limit. So usually you have to specify these two. What are Kubernetes nodes? So there are two types of nodes, worker node and master node. And worker node is usually the one in which all the application containers are running. And master node manages the worker nodes. What are Kubernetes annotations? So annotations are a way to attach some metadata in a Kubernetes object. One example can be that if I have a deployment file and I want to inject a service mesh proxy into my pod, then I can just give this as an annotation and restart the pod, and it will automatically inject the proxy. What are Kubernetes components? In very simple terms, there are master nodes and there are worker nodes inside a Kubernetes cluster. So the master node consists of API server, the scheduler, the controller manager, and the etcd data store. And the worker node is where your actual application is running. Can Kubernetes run on Windows? Yes, but only on a particular version of Windows. Can Kubernetes run without Docker? Yes. Can Kubernetes manage VMs? Not that I know of. It may in the future. Can Kubernetes run Docker containers? Absolutely. Can Kubernetes manage Docker containers? Yes. Can Kubernetes run on VMware? I don't have experience, but I've heard yes. Can Kubernetes run on bare metal? Yes. Can Kubernetes autoscale? Absolutely. That's one of the best parts about Kubernetes. Can Kubernetes replace VMware? I don't know much to comment on this. Can Kubernetes keep a secret? If you can't keep your secret with yourself, don't expect Kubernetes to keep it for you. But yeah, to answer the question, yes. Can Kubernetes run on AWS? Yes. Can Kubernetes autoscaler? Is that a question? Can Kubernetes replace OpenStack? Can't predict. Can Kubernetes create containers? Yes. Can Kubernetes run on VM? Yes. Can Kubernetes run on premise? Yes. Kubernetes can't delete pod. Again, is that a question? But there can be many reasons. Maybe because the user doesn't have permission to delete it. Kubernetes can't connect to service. Again, might be permission issue, might be the pod managed by the service is not up and running yet. Can be many reasons. Kubernetes can't delete namespace. Same answer. Kubernetes can I?
Can I move this?
This is a very nice tool to check if you have permissions to do certain things inside a Kubernetes cluster. For example, I can check kubectl auth can I create pods in all namespaces? And the answer is yes. So yes, I do have permission. Okay, I'm going to skip the how questions because those are very long and I won't be able to give brief answers to these questions like how Kubernetes works.
How does it work?
So all the mechanisms, I don't know all the mechanisms, but even if I want to explain, those will take a long time. So now we're up to what question. So what Kubernetes does. In one sentence, it does container orchestration. What Kubernetes can do, same. What Kubernetes cluster, I've already answered. What Kubernetes does not, opposite of what it does. What Kubernetes pod, I've already answered. Namespace, I've already answered. What Kubernetes solves. It solves certain issues which comes when you are managing your application in production, such as zero downtime when you update your application. So that can be solved by Kubernetes. It solves the problem of scaling. You can easily scale your application by having more containers running, more pods running. It can also do rollbacks in case your new update has some bugs in it. What Kubernetes version do I have? If you do kubectl version short, it tells you what client version you have, what server version you have. What Kubernetes is not? Why would anyone ask such question? Kubernetes, what is deployment? As I said, deployment is a layer on top of replica set, and replica set is a layer on top of pods. The main advantage in deployment is that you can ensure zero downtime rollouts, and also you can do rollbacks. Kubernetes, what is ingress? So ingress is something which connects HTTP requests coming outside of your cluster to your services inside the cluster. It can also do things like load balancing. Kubernetes, what is service? As I said, it's more like a networking endpoint, and it can expose your pods to either within the cluster or outside of the cluster, depending on what service type you use. What is Helm? It is a package manager in Kubernetes. What is a node? It's basically a physical machine in which your applications can run, and By node, we usually mean worker nodes. What is cluster IP? If it is meant the cluster IP service type, so a service of the type cluster IP exposes your pod inside your Kubernetes cluster, but not outside of it, so that other pods running can connect to this pod. What is configmap? Configmap is used to separate your pod from the configuration details that it needs so that it's easily portable across several platforms. It can also be loaded dynamically. What is a container? It's a packaged version of your app. Kubernetes, what's new? It depends on your vantage point. What node is pod running on? You can do kubectl describe pod followed by the pod name, and then you can go over and see the name of the node. So in my case, I'm running everything locally on Docker desktop. So here you can see the node name. Kubernetes, what is replica set? I've already covered. Now we are on to the when questions. Kubernetes, when to use? Whenever you want. But to answer the questions, whenever you need certain automations in your microservices, such as auto scaling, load balancing, zero downtime deployments, self healing, etc. When to use stateful set? So, when you need persistent storage in your deployment, usually that's when you should use stateful set. And also when you need consistency in the namings of your pods so that they can be easily identified in the network. That's also another reason to use stateful set. When to use namespaces, I've already covered. When to use node port. Node port is a type of service which exposes your pod outside of the cluster. If you're testing things out, then you can use node port. Otherwise, for production, it's not recommended. You have to use load balancer or ingress. When to use configmap? When you want to have your application portable across different machines, and also you want to keep your configurational details separate from the application logic, that's when you should use configmap. When to use ingress? So when you want to expose your application to the outside world, to the internet, that's when you should use ingress. Also, it does load balancing. When to use headless service? So when you need absolute control over which pod should try to connect to which exact other pod, and you also don't need load balancing inside your pod instances, that's a good time to use headless service. And it's usually achieved by setting your cluster IP to nothing, basically. When to use jobs?
I need a job.
So when you don't want to run your containers for a long time and your container is supposed to do one single thing and then just stop, then that's a good time to use jobs. When is a pod ready? When all of its containers are running, you can see that it is ready. But also you can use readiness probe to truly ensure if it is ready. When to use Helm? It is to make certain installations easy. For one example can be Prometheus. You can use Helm to install Prometheus onto your Kubernetes cluster. When to use deployment? So when you want certain automation on your application, such as scaling or zero downtime between your updates, or when you try to ensure that certain number of pods are always running in your cluster, that's a good time to use deployment. When did pod restart? If you do a kubectl describe pod followed by pod name and scroll up, you will see when it actually started. So I'm assuming that's the time. If it restarted, it should show the restart time. When to use stateful set? I've already covered. When was Kubernetes released? Around 2014. When does Kubernetes restart a pod? There can be many reasons. So one reason can be it ran out of memory and it got OOM killed. So out of memory killed. That can be one reason. If your application has a bug, that can be another reason to restart a pod because it simply panicked. There can be many other reasons. When is Kubernetes overkill? I wouldn't say at any point it is an overkill, because even if you have a simple application, just having some layer of automation on top of it really makes life easier for you, isn't it? When did Kubernetes come out? 2014. Created, okay, 2014. When does Kubernetes kill a pod? Already covered. When was Kubernetes 1.8 released? Who cares? But to answer the question, 2017. Now we're on to where questions. Where Kubernetes is used? Everywhere. But usually when you have lots of microservices and you need somebody to manage them. Where Kubernetes cluster data is stored? In the etcd data store. Where Kubernetes store logs? Where logs? Already covered. Where to store config inside your project, I guess. Where are images stored? So images can be stored in image registries. So Google Cloud has its own image registry. You can have Docker Hub as one of the image registries, and Kubernetes can pull images from there and run the application. Where to store YAML files? I usually create a folder called DevOps, and inside that I store my YAML files. Kubernetes, where to start? I'll put a link in the description for a beginner's course. You can start there. Where are secrets stored? Inside etcd data store. Where is pod running? Inside the node. Where is etcd? Inside the Kubernetes cluster. Where is empty dir? Depends on the mount path that is used inside the pod. Kubernetes mount secrets. Where is the where in it? Kubernetes, where is configmap stored? In the etcd. Where does Kubernetes pull images from? Depends where you ask it to pull it from. It can be from Docker Hub or Google Cloud Container Registry. Where is Kubernetes config file? It's in your home folder and inside a folder called .cube. So it's usually hidden. So you have to unhide it and you can see the config file. Store logs covered, store images covered. Where does Kubernetes run? There's a stadium next to my house. That's where it runs. But to answer the question, yeah, it can run on any cloud service you're using, or it can run in Docker. Okay, now we are on to which questions. Which Kubernetes API version should I use? I would say the latest ones, but if you are starting to work on a project where certain older version is used, I would recommend to check them out and be consistent with them. Sometimes there can be clash and you may not be able to figure out what you have done wrong. Which Kubernetes certification? I haven't done any, but there are two certification programs. One is for administrator, another is for developer, but yeah, choose whatever you want. Which Kubernetes distribution? I don't know. I only have experience in GKE. Which Kubernetes version to use? Use the latest one. Which Kubernetes version? If you want to check the version, just do kubectl version and you will see the version. Which Kubernetes pod network? The question is not clear. If you want to expose the pod inside the cluster, you can use a cluster IP. If you want to expose outside of the cluster, you can use load balancer. But I don't know what this exactly means though. Which node is master? You can do a kubectl get nodes, and I think it will show there in the roles of every nodes. And there you can check which one is the master. Kubernetes which Docker version? Are you interested in Docker's version or Kubernetes version? Kubernetes which OS? We usually run Linux containers. Kubernetes which API version? Covered. Kubernetes which container? What does it mean? Kubernetes which ingress controller? No idea. Kubernetes which ports? For what? Which ingress? No idea. Okay, now we're on to who questions. Kubernetes who owns? No one. It was created by Google and now it is open sourced. Some thousands of developers manage it. Kubernetes who am I?
Who am I?
Kubernetes who uses? Who doesn't? But yeah, people who want some automation over their microservices. Kubernetes who can?
I can do that.
Who created Kubernetes? Engineers at Google? Who invented? Who developed? Who made? Who uses Kubernetes in production? Yeah, I only use for testing purposes. Who maintains Kubernetes? There are like a few thousand programmers who constantly contribute to Kubernetes. Managed Kubernetes. There's no who in this. Who sells Kubernetes? Okay, one example is GKE, which is Google Kubernetes Engine, where Kubernetes is already installed and it's just very easy to start running there. And Google charges for it. So similar thing exists for Amazon as well. Now we're on to why. Why Kubernetes is bad.
I'm bad.
One word, complexity. So sometimes it's not absolutely clear what it does, especially when you're trying to scale up, and especially in case of auto scaling, I have encountered certain problems where it's not always obvious what's going on and the things which you expect may not actually be true. So yeah, but that's kind of expected when you're writing a software that solves a ton of issues. So at some point you will end up with complexity, and that's the only drawback, I can say. Why Kubernetes is used covered. Why Kubernetes will disappear. Again, the same reason why it can be bad. It's because of the complexity issue. So it is possible another service comes up which is like Kubernetes but much simpler, and yeah, that can make it disappear. Who knows? Why Kubernetes K8s? There are 8 letters between K and S, and that's why they write it K8s. Why Kubernetes over Docker Swarm? I've never used Docker Swarm, so I can't comment. Why Kubernetes is popular? Because of all the functionalities it offers and the community behind it is very strong. Why Kubernetes over ECS? I have not used ECS to comment on this. Why Kubernetes use etcd? Okay, so one reason I know is because we need distributed data storage and etcd provides that, and also we need key value data storage which is also provided by etcd. But why etcd over other distributed data storage, that I'm not sure. Why Kubernetes is important? Why it is awesome? Why Kubernetes cluster? What does it mean? Why Kubernetes over Docker? I don't think that's a correct question to ask. Why Kubernetes is vital for your business? Yeah, sure. If you want some sort of automation over the applications which are running, then it can save time for you, and time is money in business. Why Kubernetes disables swap? I don't know much about swap, but I know it was done for performance issues. Why Kubernetes featuring Nigel? I think it's a webinar. Why Kubernetes operators? Already covered. Why Kubernetes and Docker? Well, Docker helps us to containerize our application so that it can run the same way everywhere, no matter what. And Kubernetes is to orchestrate all the containers and do a lot of automations, as I discussed before. Why Kubernetes is required? Why Kubernetes is the new application server? Well, because it can do things that application servers can do, such as orchestration, routing, authentication, and security. Now we're on to will. Will Kubernetes kill Docker? No. Will Kubernetes replace OpenStack? I don't know. Will Kubernetes sync Hadoop ship? I don't have experience in Hadoop. Will Kubernetes die? We all will die. The sun is going to die in 5 billion years. So after that, everything is going to end in the solar system. Kubernetes will restart your pod. Okay, so Kubernetes will disappear. Well, yeah, all of today's cool softwares will disappear to make way for the softwares of the future. Will complexity kill Kubernetes? Yeah, that's the only thing that can kill Kubernetes. Another example in my experience is there's this service mesh called Istio, which is the most popular one, but that's also very difficult to install and work with. And recently I came across with Linkerd, which is much simpler and it just runs out of the box. So that's the main reason I have chosen Linkerd over Istio, even though Istio is by far more popular. So yeah, again, in this case, complexity was an issue. So it is definitely possible for Kubernetes to be killed by complexity. Thank you for making it till the end.
High five.
If you have any comments or any questions, or if you found something wrong in the video, then please feel free to comment. If you enjoyed the video, then feel free to like and subscribe and hit the bell icon to get notified when any video comes out. Lastly, check out the link in the description to find the courses about Kubernetes and microservices which I explained in the video. And thanks. Have a nice day. Bye.